I hope you guys are doing good. Yeah, let us begin the today's session. I will be continuing with the same topic, classification and tabulation. Try to recall, students. In the last class, we have discussed meaning, definition and objectives of classification as well as types of classification we have studied in the last sessions. Under types of classification, there are four types. One is chronological classification, second one is spatial or geographical classification, and third one is qualitative classification, and fourth one is a quantitative classification. The first two types, one is a chronological and spatial classification, we have already discussed, and two classifications are remaining, that is qualitative and quantitative classification. Let us discuss in the today's class. Okay. So here the word qualitative and the quantitative. So what does it mean, qualitative and quantitative data? So idanna ನಾವು ಏನು ಮಾಡಿದ್ದೇವೆ, ಬೇಸಿಕ್ ಕಾನ್ಸೆಪ್ಟ್ ಸೆಷನ್ಸ್ ಆಗುವಾಗ ಅದರಲ್ಲಿ ಡಿಸ್ಕಸ್ ಮಾಡಿದ್ದೇವೆ. Try to recall, students. Here qualitative data are numerically not measurable or it turns to attributes. Attributes ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿದ್ರೆ qualitative data which varies from unit to unit. ಅದನ್ನ ಏನು ಮಾಡ್ಲಿಕ್ಕೆ ಆಗೋದಿಲ್ಲ, ನಂಬರ್ಸ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಎಕ್ಸ್ಪ್ರೆಸ್ ಮಾಡ್ಲಿಕ್ಕೆ ಆಗೋದಿಲ್ಲ. So we can only give just a information, whereas quantitative data we can give in terms of numbers. We can give the information in terms of numbers. So such kind of data or informations are known as quantitative data. So sometimes ಏನಾಗುತ್ತೆ, ಒಂದು ಪರ್ಸನ್ ಇಂದ ಇನ್ನೊಂದು ಪರ್ಸನ್ ಗೆ ಆಗುವಾಗ ವೇರಿ ಆಗ್ತಾ ಹೋಗುತ್ತೆ. Okay, so such type of data are known as variables. So now in today's session, the third classification is qualitative classification. Qualitative classification. So under this, again there are three types. One is a simple or one-way classification. Simple or one-way classification. Second one is dichotomous. Third one is contingency table. Contingency table, or another name for this is manifold classification, or we call it as manifold classification. Okay, so here classification is nothing but arrangement of data according to the common characteristics. So here what kind of characteristics it is? It should be qualitative data. Quality anta helidre yavadala barbeku? Quality such as it may be gender, or it may be what? It may be education, or it may be what? Marital status. All these things are what? It is just information. It is, we can't express in terms of numbers. Such kind of data are known as qualitative data. So based on these data, we have to classify the things. So here under that there are three types. One is simple or one-way classification, another one is dichotomous, and third one is a contingency table or else manifold classification. So just note down, I will be explaining one by one here. First, one is simple or one-way classification. So simple, name itself indicates that a simple one. Simple one anta helidre iga classification it should be coming under qualitative data itself. ಅದಕ್ಕೆ ಏನು ಮಾಡಬೇಕು simple or one way classification is a classification of the units based on single characteristic. ಯಾವುದೇ characteristic ಅನ್ನು ತಗೊಳ್ಳಬಹುದು. It should be single classification on the basis of single characteristic is known as a simple or one way classification. So here it may be whatever it may be characteristic you can consider. It may be occupations agirbodu, it may be what courses agirbodu. All those things are what one particular characteristic, but it should be what? It should be qualitative data. So here one is simple or one way classification. It is classification of the units. Classification of the units on the basis of single characteristic. Single characteristics is known as a simple or one way classification. Simple or one way classification. So, what example we can give it for simple or one-way classification? So, for example, here in a certain locality there may be a residence. Our occupation, depending upon their occupation, we can make a classification. Here, occupation is what? One particular characteristic. What kind of characteristic it is? It is a qualitative characteristic. Occupations ಅನ್ನು ತಕೊಂಡು ಅದರ ಎಷ್ಟು ಜನ ರೆಸಿಡೆಂಟ್ಸ್ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ ಅಂತ we can check it out. So this is one example of classification, simple or one way classification. So here example, next example for one way or simple classification is number of residents in certain locality, depending upon their occupation. According to occupation. Here occupation I can consider it as a one particular characteristic. Here occupation and number of residents. So here occupation there may be teacher, doctor, or there may be a clerk. Whatever occupation you can take, and you can find out how many residents are there in a particular locality. You can check it out. This is what one example of a simple or one way classification. Here I have considered only single characteristic and corresponding residents. Okay, this is what simple or one way classification. And the second type is dichotomous under qualitative classification. Now let us discuss what is meant by dichotomous. So here the word die is nothing but 2. Die anta helidre meaning 2 anta barutte. That means you can take any characteristic or classification of the units based on a single characteristic, and we have to divide it into two classes, or we have to divide it into two groups, and then such type of classification is known as a dichotomous. ಯಾವುದೇ classification ಅಥವಾ ಯಾವುದೇ characteristic ಅನ್ನು ತಗೊಳ್ಳಬಹುದು, you have to divide how many classes? You have to divide into two classes. So that is the meaning of dichotomous. ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿದ್ರೆ ಯಾವುದೇ ಕ್ಲಾಸಿಫಿಕೇಶನ್ ತಗೊಂಡು ಎರಡು ಗ್ರೂಪ್ಸ್ ಆಗಿ ಡಿವೈಡ್ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಹೋಗಬೇಕು. So here next one is dichotomous. Dichotomous is nothing but classification of the units based on single characteristic, and we have to divide it into two groups, and then such kind of classification is known as a dichotomous. Here dichotomous is classification of the units based on single characteristic and divide into two classes or groups. Two classes or groups. Here I have divided into two classes or groups. Have you divided ಮಾಡ್ತಿದ್ದೇನೆ. Then how many characteristics I have to take? Only single characteristic I have to take. So I can divide it into two groups. Then we call it as a dichotomous. ಯಾವುದೆಲ್ಲ ನಾವು characteristic ಅನ್ನು ತಕೊಂಡು two classes ಆಗಿ divide ಮಾಡಬಹುದು? For example, simple example, in a classroom, if the strength of classroom somebody asks, then what do you have to consider strength in a board education system? So here male as well as female students you have to consider. That means members or students in a particular classroom I can divide according to their gender or according to their sex. I can divide as a male and female. So here I have divided it into two groups. According to what? Here which characteristic I have considered? Gender. Okay, same way in another examples, marital status another tagondre, marital status is a one particular characteristic. Adralli ಏನನ್ನ ಕ್ಯಾಲ್ಕುಲೇಟ್ ಮಾಡಬಹುದು ಅಥವಾ ಏನನ್ನ ಫೈಂಡ್ ಔಟ್ ಮಾಡಬಹುದು? How many are of them married and single, like that. Again I have divided into two groups. So this is one example of what dichotomous. ನೀವು ಇದಲ್ಲದೆ ಇನ್ನು ಬೇರೆ ಯಾವುದು ಎಕ್ಸಾಂಪಲ್ ಕೂಡ ತಗೊಳ್ಳಬಹುದು. ಎಜುಕೇಶನ್ ಸ್ಟೇಟಸ್ ತಗೊಂಡ್ರೆ ಅಲ್ಲಿ educated and uneducated. So like that, any characteristic you can take, so it should be divided into two subgroups, then we call it as a dichotomous. So example for this is members of club can be classified on the basis of sex here. So here members I can divide it as the two subgroups, that is male and female. And finally the total. This is what male and female. Members divide according to here which characteristic I have taken here according to since I can divide members as male and female. ಇದು ಒಂದು particular example ನಾನು ಏನು ಮೆನ್ಷನ್ ಮಾಡಿದ ಹಾಗೆ ನೀವು ಬೇರೆ ಎಕ್ಸಾಂಪಲ್ಸ್ ಕೂಡ ತಗೊಳ್ಳಬಹುದು. Okay, next last one is under qualitative, that is contingency table or manifold classification. Now these two are what simple. One way irbodu ade dichotomous ಏನು simple classification ಆಯ್ತು. But survey is not only about one or two characteristics ಆಗಿರೋದಿಲ್ಲ ಅಲ್ವಾ, it may be included so many information. So at that time what we have to do, ಹೇಗೆ ನಾವು ಅದನ್ನು ಕ್ಲಾಸಿಫೈ ಮಾಡಬಹುದು, ಈಗ ಒಂದು ಪರ್ಟಿಕ್ಯುಲರ್ ಲೊಕ್ಯಾಲಿಟಿ ಅನ್ನು ತಗೊಂಡ್ರೆ ಅದರ ಪಾಪ್ಯುಲೇಷನ್ ಅನ್ನು ಸ್ಟಡಿ ಮಾಡೋದಿದ್ರೆ ಬರೀ ಪಾಪ್ಯುಲೇಷನ್ ಮಾತ್ರ ಸ್ಟಡಿ ಮಾಡೋದಿಲ್ಲ, ನಾವು how many members, how many male and how many females are there, and how many are of married and unmarried are there, and how many are of employed and how many are of unemployed are there. So here you ನೋಡಬಹುದು, ನಾನು ಒಂದಕ್ಕೆ ಲಿಮಿಟೇಷನ್ ಹಾಕೊಳ್ಳಿಲ್ಲ, ಏನು ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಹೋಗ್ತಿದ್ದೇನೆ, ಸಬ್ ಡಿವಿಷನ್ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಹೋಗ್ತಿದ್ದೇನೆ. ಫಸ್ಟ್ ಏನು ಮೇನ್ ಇಂಟೆನ್ಷನ್ is to calculate population. Under that I have categorized male and female, and then I have divided under male itself how many are of married and single, like that for female also, and how many are of employed and unemployed. So like that it includes so many information. Yes sir. So here only just two information. What is that? According to sex I have divided male and female, that's it. But in contingency table it includes so many information, more than two characteristics we have to classify it. It should be what? It should be qualitative data. Qualitative data ಗೆ ಆಗಿರಬೇಕು, ಮತ್ತೆ ಅದನ್ನ ಏನು ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಹೋಗಬೇಕು, divisions of many things. So here contingency table ಇದಾಗಿದೆ ಅನ್ಕೊಳ್ತೇನೆ. So third one is contingency table or manifold classification. So third one under qualitative itself, contingency or manifold classification. Here contingency table is nothing but here classification of the units based on two or more characteristics, then it is contingency table or manifold classification. Okay, so same example that I will give here, population example, population of locality, certain locality can be classified according to sex, then here marital status, and education. How many characteristics I have taken? 1, 2, 3. 2 or more characteristics I have to show in a single table. That means, so main characteristic is here population. I can divide into male and female. Under that again I can divide as married and single. Here also married and single. According to education. That means under married itself, educated and uneducated. Educated and uneducated. Here also educated and uneducated. I'll briefly write ED, educated and uneducated, and educated and uneducated. So here I can divide again into educated and uneducated. Here this table includes so many information. What is that? Here first thing is the population. Under that again I have divided into two subgroups according to sex, male and female, and then I have categorized according to what? Marital status, and how many are of them married and single. Again here also. And the next thing is educated and uneducated. This is what it not only includes one or two informations, it is included so many information. You want to make divisions according to different characteristics. So such kind of tables or such kind of classification is known as a contingency table. Okay, this is what the classification of the qualitative data. Last one is there, that is quantitative data. So first of all, you should know what is meant by quantitative data. Now, here quantitative is nothing but, as I told in the beginning, here quantitative data are nothing but it should be expressed in terms of numbers. Numbers express madike. So it should be variable. What are those variables? Numbers express madbodu. It may be height or it may be weight, then income agirbodu, salary, then age agirbodu. All those informations we can express in terms of numbers. Correct, right? So such kind of classification based on these data, then we call it as a quantitative classification. So last one is under types of classification, quantitative classification. Fourth one, quantitative classification. Here, quantitative is a classification on the basis of quantitative data or variables such as weight, height, age, etc. It should be expressed in terms of numbers. So, example simple example, height weight so one example, two examples I give you. Example 1, that is height of a students in terms of centimeters and number of students. Here height you can easily tell in terms of numbers. Alva ಯಾರತ್ರ ಕೇಳಿದ್ರು ಕೂಡ ಅವರು ಏನು ಹೇಳ್ತಾರೆ, numbers ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಹೇಳ್ತಾರೆ ಅಲ್ವಾ. So here I have considered height in terms of centimeters, that may be 140 to 150, 150 to 160, 160 to 170, 170 to 180, like this. And here number of students may be 6, 5, 4, 3. So this is one particular example. I will explain it later. First, take down example 2. Here, number of apples per box. Number of apples per box, and here number of boxes. Here 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 and 10. And here 6, 4, 3, 5, again 6 and 2. So these are the two examples for quantitative data. Previous idರಲ್ಲಿ ನಾನು ಏನು ಮಾಡಿದ್ದೇನೆ, only just information ಕೊಟ್ಟಿದ್ದೇನೆ ಅಲ್ವಾ. It may be male or female, or it may be married or single, like that I have given only just information. But compare it, so here also I can express in terms of numbers. Also in this example I have mentioned all the numbers here. Observe ಮಾಡಬಹುದು, this and this not the same, because you can observe in the first column here I have taken 140 to 150. ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಎರಡು numbers ಇದೆ, but in this example I have taken specific or particular numbers only I have mentioned here. ಅಲ್ವಾ, ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಕರೆಕ್ಟ್ ಆಗಿ ಒಂದು ಸಿಂಗಲ್ ವ್ಯಾಲ್ಯೂಸ್ ಇದೆ, ಬಟ್ ಇಲ್ಲಿ ನಾಟ್ ನೋಯಿಂಗ್ ಎಕ್ಸಾಕ್ಟ್ಲಿ 140 to 150 ರೇಂಜ್ ಅನ್ನು ಮೆನ್ಷನ್ ಮಾಡಿದ್ದೇನೆ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿದ್ರೆ ಏನು, 140 to 150 there are so many numbers. 141 ಇರಬಹುದು ಅಥವಾ 142 ಇರಬಹುದು, 142.5 ಇರಬಹುದು, like that it goes on increases. So like that here also these two values are not these two distributions are not the same. So this representation is known as a frequency distribution. You might have heard this word, frequency distribution. This concept is familiar to you. You have already studied in the lower classes frequency distribution and putting of tally marks, writing the frequency in the next column. All those things we have already learned in the lower classes. In the next class I will be explaining what is that frequency distribution, how to construct frequency distribution, how to put tally marks, all those things I will be explaining in the next class. In today's class we have studied qualitative as well as quantitative data. Under qualitative we have studied three types. One is simple or one way, and second one is dichotomous, and third one is contingency table, and fourth one is this one. Under fourth type of classification is quantitative classification. I hope you guys have understand the today's session. So I will be coming with the new concept in the next session.